Imagine this moment. Someone says something that hurts you. Everyone expects a reaction, an argument, an explanation, something. But instead, you go quiet. Not because you don't care, not because you have nothing to say, but because in that moment, your mind simply shuts down. And strangely, the more people push you to talk, the quieter you become. Most people think silence means something simple, that the person is being cold, or stubborn, or avoiding the problem. But psychology suggests something very different. Sometimes, silence is the mind trying to protect itself, and most people never realize it. So stay with me for a moment, because once you understand what's actually happening in the mind during those silent moments, you might start seeing this behavior, and even yourself, in a completely different way. But before we try to understand that silence, there's an important question. Why do some people react immediately when they're hurt, while others suddenly become quiet? Some explain exactly how they feel, but others pause. Their mind goes blank. The words simply don't come. From the outside, it may look like they're avoiding the situation, but inside, something very different may be happening. For some people, the reaction is instant, but for others, the mind turns inward. Instead of responding immediately, the brain starts asking questions. What just happened? Did they really mean that? How should I respond? And before those questions are answered, the moment has already passed. This creates a very common misunderstanding. People assume that silence means someone has nothing to say, but often the opposite is true. Sometimes silence appears because there are too many thoughts at once. The mind simply needs time to organize them. In psychology, this is often linked to something called emotional overload. When emotions become intense, the brain temporarily pauses outward reactions so it can understand what's happening internally. So that quiet moment isn't always indifference. Sometimes it's the mind trying to slow everything down. But this raises another question. Why do some people develop this pattern more strongly than others? Why does silence become their instinct in difficult moments? To understand that, we need to look a little deeper into how people learn to deal with emotional pain over time. But here is something many people don't realize. For most quiet minds, this pattern didn't appear overnight. It was learned, little by little. Some people grow up in environments where expressing feelings feels safe. They speak, they explain what they feel, and someone listens. But for others, the experience is very different. Maybe when they tried to express pain, they were ignored. Maybe their feelings were minimized. Or maybe every emotional conversation quickly turned into conflict. And over time, the brain begins to notice something. Speaking up doesn't always lead to understanding. Sometimes it leads to more tension. And when the mind learns that emotional moments can become overwhelming, it develops a different strategy. Instead of reacting outwardly, it turns inward. Silence becomes a way to create space before the situation escalates. And interestingly, many people who go quiet in difficult moments are not emotionally detached at all. In fact, they're often highly aware of what they're feeling. They simply process those emotions internally, which explains something that often confuses others. Someone who appears calm and silent on the outside may actually be experiencing intense emotions on the inside. But this leads to another question. If silence can be a way of protecting emotional balance, why do other people interpret it so differently? To understand that, we need to look at how silence is perceived in social situations. But something interesting often happens after that quiet moment. The conversation may end. The other person moves on. But inside the mind, it's not over yet. For many people who go silent in emotional situations, the real processing begins later, sometimes minutes or hours later. And sometimes the moment returns again and again in their thoughts. Have you ever experienced something like this? You walk away from a conversation. Everything seems quiet, but suddenly your mind starts replaying the moment. What exactly happened? What do they mean by that? What should I have said? And slowly, the word begin to appear. The response you couldn't find earlier. The boundary you wish you had expressed. And this creates a strange experience, because when the moment was happening, your mind felt empty. But later, your thoughts become incredibly clear, almost as if your brain needed distance before it could understand what really happened. Psychologists sometimes call this delayed emotional processing. For some people, emotions move faster than thoughts, but for others, thoughts need time to catch up. And during that delay, silence appears, not because the person has nothing to say, but because their mind is still organizing the experience, which explains something that many quiet people know very well. The conversation may end in the room, but it continues inside their mind, and that internal reflection can last far longer than anyone around them realizes. But this raises another interesting question. If silence is often part of a deeper emotional process, why do other people misunderstand it so easily? To understand that, we need to look at how silence is perceived in human relationships. But here is where another problem appears. Silence is often misunderstood. From the outside, quietness can look like distance. Someone asks a question, they expect a reaction, but instead, they receive silence. And the mind quickly tries to explain it. Maybe they're ignoring me, but in many cases, none of that is true, because while one person sees silence, the other person may still be processing everything that just happened. And this difference in timing creates confusion. Some people process emotions out loud. Others process them internally. Neither way is wrong. They are simply different ways the mind deals with emotional intensity. But when these two styles meet in the same moment, misunderstandings can easily appear. And this is why many people who go quiet during conflict often feel something very specific. They feel misunderstood. But here is the deeper question. If silence can sometimes protect emotional balance, could it also have another purpose? Because for many people, that quiet moment is not just protection. Sometimes it is also control. Think about how easy it is to say something in the heat of the moment, a word spoken in anger, a reaction that can't be taken back. For many people, silence is a mind creating a pause to slow things down, a moment to prevent emotions from taking over. And that pause can be powerful because it allows the mind to step back, to observe, to understand what is really happening, which means that the person who appears quiet on the outside may actually be practicing a very deep form of emotional awareness, not reacting immediately, but choosing to process before responding. And in a world where reactions often happen instantly, that ability is more rare than people realize. So the next time you notice someone going quiet during an emotional moment, it may not mean they have nothing to say. Sometimes it simply means they are choosing silence, overreaction, and sometimes that silence is where the most thoughtful responses begin. And now I'm curious about something. When you're hurt or confronted, do you react immediately, or do you tend to go quiet first? Some people process emotions out loud. Others process them in silence. Neither way is necessarily wrong. They're simply different ways the mind tries to protect itself. But understanding these differences can change the way we see ourselves and the people around us. So tell me in the comments, are you someone who speaks first, or someone who needs silence before finding the right words?